spread it amongst the world. And if we don't take our testimony out to the world, how are we going to minister to those that really need it? I'm not called to minister to someone who's just spiritually mature, knows how to walk the walk of Christ. I'm called to minister to someone who has no clue, right? We are called to minister to people who have no clue and save as many people as we can. Bring them to Christ. We are fishers of men and fishers of women. We are called to fish. We are called to bring them to Christ. We cannot let what God has done for us stay with us. We have to share it. We also cannot allow that place of comfort to become our prison. And see, the reason why I say that is because had Moses stayed in Egypt, Moses would have died. Had Frodo stayed, and Moses' people, the Israelites, the Hebrews, would have never left Egypt. Or at least God would have found another way to free his Hebrew people, but it wouldn't have been Moses. We wouldn't be learning about Moses. If Frodo doesn't leave the Shire with the ring, Sauron and his armies win. The only reason why Sauron is able to win is because he doesn't have the ring. He no longer has access to the ring because Frodo destroys it in the last movie. If you haven't seen them, I'm sorry to spoil them. They've been out for the last 20 years. I'm sorry. But Frodo destroys the ring at the end of the third movie. Kind of destroys it. But we'll get to that later. But the point is that the Shire, Rivendell, the Shire, had Frodo not left, Sauron would have conquered all of Middle-earth and eventually gotten to the Shire and turned that place of comfort into a place of pain, a place of suffering, a place of sorrow, a place of bondage. Youth camp, if we are not careful, can become a place of bondage if we never leave. And I'm not saying it's bondage as in like it's, it's sorrowful, but what I'm saying is that we end up falling into traps like spiritual radicalism. We're chasing an emotion or a feeling rather than chasing God himself. It is a spiritual high when you get to youth camp, and youth camp is necessary. Don't get me wrong. And it's good to have those kind of revivals in our life, but there comes a point in time where you have to realize that as you keep moving along, you're no longer chasing the revival in your life, you're chasing an emotion. You're chasing a high. And it may not be a high on drugs, but it's a spiritual high. And that's all you're chasing. We have to be willing to leave the place of comfort in order to accomplish the goal that Christ has set before us. If Frodo doesn't leave, the ring doesn't get destroyed, Middle-earth doesn't get saved. If Moses doesn't leave and go to Midian, or if Moses doesn't leave Midian, the Israelites never get saved, and either Moses dies in Egypt or Moses stays a shepherd the rest of his life. I know we talked about shepherds the last time. We talked about how God's the good shepherd and God is a shepherd, but Moses should not have been a shepherd his entire life. That was God's will for him. God's will for him was to be the leader of his people. Do not sell the will of God for your life short because you're chasing a spiritual high. Don't sell it short. The journey. There's two things. One, it's not going to be easy. Frodo, within the first movie, he gets stabbed twice. And by the third movie, he gets stabbed a third time. The first two movies, he gets stabbed by a mortal blade, which is like a blade of the dead. And then he gets stabbed by a 15-foot cave troll with a spear. I mean, the guy's bigger than Goliath. I mean, imagine David getting stabbed by Goliath, actually. Like, that story doesn't end out too well if David gets stabbed. Thankfully, he doesn't. But Frodo is smaller than David, and the cave troll is bigger than Goliath. Thankfully, Frodo has mithril armor on, so he just gets a nasty little bruise. Then, in the third movie, he gets stabbed by like a 20-foot spider. Frodo's journey is not easy. Moses wanders in the desert for 40 years. He has to watch Egypt, his home, endure plague after plague after plague in order to get the message across to Pharaoh that he needs to let God's people go. The journey is not easy for either of them. Just as how the Christian walk, the road to eternal relationship with the Father, is not easy. Never in Scripture does it say being a Christian is easy. Christ says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Yes, but he's talking about the love that he has for us. His love for us is easy and light. It is not a burdensome love. But the walk that we must endure in order to reach that eternal relationship with Christ is very difficult. And any preacher that tells you that it is easy is lying to you. 100%. And so, we have to understand that the journey after we leave camp, the day that we leave camp, from then on out, it is not easy. It is not light. It is something that we cannot take for granted. We cannot put our lives, we cannot put ourselves into the world and then let ourselves become of the world. You know what I'm saying? It's that whole in the world and not of the world thing. We don't get a choice whether or not we're in the world, but we do get a choice of whether or not we're of the world. We have to remind ourselves daily, hey, look, I have to pick up my cross. And picking up a cross, we used to have it. It's over there. That thing's not the easiest thing in the world to pick up, and that's not even scaled right. It's tiny. The cross Christ is picking up is massive. That is the cross we're called to pick up daily. I remember when I was in the youth group, I was maybe 14 or 15 years old. We went to a fall retreat center, and Pastor Bill built crosses for us and made us carry them through the woods on a trail, about the same length as the road that Christ took to get to Calvary. That thing was heavy, and we had 4 or 5 people carrying each cross. Brittany remembers. That sucker was heavy. I hated it. I left it about like 200 feet into it. I left it. I was like, forget this. I'm not doing this build. But the road to eternal relationship with Christ is not an easy one. We will encounter so many trials and tribulations, and so many people that are out there to harm us. Frodo encounters Uruk-hai, he encounters orcs, he encounters goblins, he encounters so many animals, so many beings. Sorry, they might as well be animals. But he encounters so many beings that are out to destroy him, that are out to keep him from accomplishing his goal. If you don't believe me, if you're going to accomplish those kinds of people, ask Moses, ask David, ask Daniel, ask Job, ask me, ask literally any adult in this church. You'll find them easily. It was the second point. It was never meant to be walked alone. You do not have to bear the weight of the journey on your own. Frodo does not make this journey to Mordor by himself. He starts off with the company. The company breaks up, but he still takes Sam with him. And in all honesty, Frodo doesn't want Sam to go with him, but Sam is the kind of friend that I want to be. Sam, even though he can't swim, chases Frodo. Frodo's in a boat. Sam swims and chases him in a river, trying to catch up to him. And make sure he's not alone in the fight. He's not alone in his journey. Moses doesn't travel to Egypt on his own. Moses does not wander in the wilderness by himself for 40 years. He's got his brother, he's got his sister, he's got his father-in-law, he's got his children, he's got his wife. And most importantly, he's got God. The journey is not meant to be walked alone. You have people walking alongside you. Even when it was just Frodo and Sam, three of the members of the company, Aragorn, a human, mostly, with an elf named Legolas, and a dwarf named Gimli, those 3 guys are moving along as Frodo and Sam are. And eventually they get to a point where they're at the same location. And we'll talk about that in just a second with the last one. But you're not meant to walk it alone. Trust in your friends. Trust in your mentors. Trust in the Lord. Let them walk alongside you in the journey. Don't try and do it by yourself, because I'm going to tell you right now, you'll fail. You'll fail. Every time. I've tried to do it alone. It doesn't work. Ever. Find your companions. Find people that love Christ, that are going to point you back to Christ, that are going to challenge you to be a better person, not be afraid to rely on others. We are created as social beings. We are called to rely on the ecclesia. There's this whole narrative going around that says, you don't need the church to pray, you don't need the church to worship, you can do that in your own home, but you do need the church to keep your sanity and to keep you accountable. There's nobody holding you accountable. If Sam was not there, Frodo would have put the ring on more times than I can count, and either Frodo would have ended up dead, or Frodo would have ended up servant of Sauron. Sauron's the big evil guy that we really don't like. I hate Sauron. Yeah. Nasty dude. Finally, the enemy's gate. I have one main point for the enemy's gate, and that point is don't stop. When you get to the enemy's gate, don't stop. Frodo, in the first movie, they get to where they can see Mordor from a distance. They see the Black Gate, they see the storm clouds, they see all of it, all the nastiness of Mordor, and instead of Frodo and Sam turning around and saying, I want to go home, they want to go home, but they also realize that they have a greater purpose. That a greater purpose has been called on their lives, and in order to be able to reach that greater purpose, to reach that goal, they have to go through. Moses has to walk into the most powerful man in the world's throne room, Pharaoh himself. Moses and Aaron, Frodo and Sam. Connections? Huh? Yeah. I was proud of myself in this one. But Moses and Aaron get to the gate of Pharaoh. They get to those big doors, and they walk in. And notice in chapter 5, they just tell Pharaoh what God has told them. They walk into the enemy's gate. They walk up to it and knowing that the goal, the end purpose of them being there can only be accomplished by walking into that throne room and confronting the most powerful man in the world. Frodo and Sam, the only way they're able to accomplish their goal is by walking into Mordor and confronting the largest army Middle-earth has ever seen. But you don't walk into Mordor, you don't walk into Pharaoh's throne room alone. You see, while Frodo and Sam, in order for them to be able to get into Mordor, and for them to get to Mount Doom, which is the fiery volcano that it's the only place where you can destroy the ring. Right? So the only way they can get there is if somehow armies aren't looking at them. The big eye in the sky ain't looking for them out there. So what his friends do is his friends take the armies of men and elves and dwarves. I don't think the dwarves are there. I think it's just men and elves at this point. And it was the one dwarf. They take the armies of men and elves, they march on to the Black Gate, and they use themselves as a distraction. They've already fought they fought 2 battles, really. And they're about to gear themselves up to fight a 3rd one against the largest army the Lord's ever seen, or not the Lord, Middle-earth has ever seen. And meanwhile, as they're used as a distraction, Frodo and Sam are able to march right through Mordor. Let's see. I cannot stress it enough. I have stressed it through now 2 of my sermons. Community, relationship is everything. There's a reason why I've stressed it. Relationship with one another. I have 6 friends, 7 friends maybe, that I consider my closest friends in the world. And when I need help, when I need someone to just lean on, dude, those guys are some of my first contacts. Those guys mean the world to me. And if they ever needed anything, I would try and move heaven and earth to help them out in any way that I could. I've offered them places to sleep for the night. I've brought them into my own home here, at home, let them stay here. I've tried to help as much as I can. Relationship is everything. Friendship, family, all of it is so important. Without that level of accountability, without that relationship, that community, that camaraderie between other Christians, your walk gets nigh impossible. And so my conclusion is very short. now that you've left youth camp, you're on your journey, I have one question for you, and that is, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do now that youth camp is over? That your spiritual high is done, and you're back here in youth group. The youth camp's been over for well over a week now. What are you going to do? Are you just going to let what happened at youth camp stay at youth camp, or are you going to try and carry it into this youth group and allow it to ignite something? Are you going to allow it to create a spark that can eventually turn into a flame and create such a fire and passion in this youth group that we haven't seen? Are you going to let youth camp become a spark? Are you going to let youth camp ignite a fire, or are you just going to let it die? Are you going to try and go it alone by yourself, let this spiritual revival that you experienced at youth camp stay within yourself, and then within a week, you're back to the same old habits? What are you going to do when the journey goes sideways? What happens when you fall back into something that you used to do? What happens when you fall out of the pattern of not reading your Bible or doing your devotions every day? What happens when your journey goes sideways? What are you going to do? What are you going to do when you get shot by the flaming arrow or by the flaming darts of the enemy? What happens when Satan starts picking at you and starts pointing at you and starts prodding you and starts saying you failed? It only took you a week and you still failed. What are you going to do? Are you going to rely on Christ? Are you going to rely on your community? Or are you just going to sit there and let it sit and simmer within you to a point where you can't handle it anymore? And you're looking for another youth camp. You're looking to get back to that spiritual high because that's the only place you can find freedom. It's not. It is not the only place you can find freedom. Frodo, believe it or not, finds the most freeing feeling in the entire trilogy at the very end, when the journey is done. When the ring is destroyed and Frodo can sit there and look. Now, granted, Frodo thinks he's going to die at the very end. He doesn't. He gets saved. He gets put back, and he goes to the eternal lands where the elves are going. Moses let his problems fester within him. I love Moses. I love Moses' story, but Moses isn't allowed to enter into the promised land. He allows his anger to get the better of him, get the better of his judgment. And he strikes the rock twice. He disobeys God. Because he disobeys God, he's not allowed into the kingdom. He's not allowed into Canaan. He's never allowed into it. Obedience. Trust. That's what it counts on. And lastly, what are you going to do when you encounter the black gate? What are you going to do when you encounter the enemy's gate? You realize that you have to walk through that valley of the shadow of death in order to get to that eternal relationship with the Father. See how I'm connecting all these sermons together? Like, it's not a sermon series, but I promise I remember what I've preached for the most part. What I'm saying is that when you see that valley, when you see that black gate, when you see Pharaoh's throne room, what are you going to do? Are you going to try and march in there by yourself? When Pharaoh's got an army behind him, are you going to try and march in with someone beside you? Are you going to try and march in with the Lord standing at your side? You've got to invite him. He's not going to invite himself. You've got to invite the Lord into your life. You've got to invite the Lord into your valleys of the shadow of death. You've got to invite the Lord into Mordor with you when you see the black gate. Someone that you love more than a brother. Someone that you're closer to more or a sister. God is the ultimate companion. Yes, focus on the companionship and the relationship in the room in the church. Also focus on your relationship and your companionship with the Lord. The Lord's going to be able to help you walk through that black gate, walk through the land of Mordor, up through Mount Doom, He's going to be there with you. The choice is, are you going to invite him for the journey? Are you going to invite him for the ride? You can't accomplish the journey by yourself. You definitely can't walk into Mordor or walk into Pharaoh's throne room or walk into whatever enemy is sitting in your life's throne room and say, I've got this. I've tried and I've failed multiple times. I've tried it on my own. Thought that I was the stuff, that I deserved something, and I walked in and I almost got laughed out the room. I might as well have gotten laughed out the room. I don't deserve any kind of respect without my Lord. The Lord is the one who gives me grace. The Lord is the one that saved my life. Without him, I don't accomplish his goal. What are you going to do? Let's bow our heads and pray. Father, I thank you for the day. I thank you for this week. I thank you for allowing us to be able to go to youth camp and experience what you had planned for us throughout that week. God, I appreciate you being our ultimate companion. I appreciate you walking with us in our journey. I appreciate you giving us a purpose, giving us a goal to help us leave our safe place to accomplish kingdom works for you, God. I thank you that you walk with us into the throne rooms of our enemies, into the dark lands of our enemies. God, you truly are the greatest companion